All right, so we'll just start off with some introductions just so that everyone knows who's on the call before moving to some of the agenda items that I proposed. So I'll get us started and then we can just go around popcorn style. This is just going to be really quick. So if you just want to introduce your name, the organization that you're representing, and your role, that would be great. My name is Melissa Gowen and I'm with the Child Abuse Prevention Center, and I'm the project manager for the Coalition for Victims of Child Abuse. I've had the opportunity to meet all of you individually, so I'm really excited to have you all here together today as we plan for our symposia. I'll hand it over to Michael Williams if you'd like to go next.
Hi, I'm Michael Williams. I'm a program director at the Child Abuse Prevention Center. I work with Melissa. I also work with our Strategies Technical Assistance Program and the California Family Resource Association. Should I tag the next person or? Okay, I'll go on the order of my screen and Allison.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I jumped the gun. But for Celine, I'm Allison Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the clinical manager at Center for Community Solutions in San Diego. And I will popcorn Denise.
Hi, good morning. Denise Wyatt. I am the executive director at the Family Healing Center in Fresno, California. We're a child advocacy center. And I will popcorn to David.
Greetings. I'm David Love. I'm the Executive Director of Valley Community Counseling Services in San Joaquin County. Among many other things, we are the Child Abuse Treatment Center, the Chat Center. I'm a consultant for the CADA Center and APSAC in the child abuse field. Nice to see you all this morning. And Alexa?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexa. I am the supervising victim advocate for the Safe Family Justice Centers in Riverside County. We're a nonprofit that is partnered with the District Attorney's Office, and we serve or we provide services to victims of 5 different crime types. So domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, child and elder abuse.
I think I'm the last one. So hi, everyone. I'm Celine Fabiano. I am the program supervisor at Pathways Counseling Center at Seneca, and we are an outpatient counseling center, and we one of the populations that we serve are children who've been victimized.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for those quick introductions. At this time, I'm going to move into a few updates that I have about the symposia, and then I'll turn it over to David, who's going to share a slide deck that he's prepared for your review and feedback. So you all will be the first group of people to see this slide deck and have priority in giving feedback. So if there's anything that you'd like to see included in that, now would be the time to give that feedback. But just to give a few updates before I turn it over to David, I had asked you all for input on how you wanted to brand the symposia, and the overwhelming response was, for the first option, innovative interventions responding to child sexual abuse and strengthening family systems. So I've started creating content around that. We have a few promotional flyers that are out on our LinkedIn and Facebook pages, and I'm happy to share that with you all if you want to include that in your newsletters or any other communications that you share with the folks on your staff or volunteers who may be interested and may benefit from this training opportunity. Right now, we have about 40 people registered. However, I'd like to see that number doubled. So that's something that we're currently working on, is just recruitment, since registration opened last week. And I'm really hoping that I can tap into you all and your networks to help spread the word about this upcoming opportunity. So those are a few updates that I have on my end for the July 14th symposia. And then I'll turn it over to David if you'd like to share your slide deck.
Thank you. Let me get to my share screen, but here's always my problem as a trainer. And when I do lots of child abuse training, we have a group of people who have probably barely got into the child abuse treatment field. And, you know, all of our agencies were struggling to recruit therapists every day. And then I got the group that I have to put through a lot of training before I would let them see sexually molested kids to get the experience, both the training they require if you're a funded OES program, but also really the competence they need to do it. And then I've got 4 staff who've been with me 25 years doing child abuse treatment, and they could teach part of the class easily. The other issue for me is sort of, you gave me a topic that I would normally spend 4 days on. I mean, I teach an all-day topic on offenders, on family therapy, on reunification. My work I'm doing down in Fresno now, a lot of it in the courts, I spend 3 hours on the stand testifying about just the symptoms of child abuse for children, so that the jury is, how do you educate a jury in 3 hours about child abuse? And most of them don't know diddly squat about it, and they're going to make horribly important decisions for lots of people's lives. So I need your help a little bit, sort of, in how we want to sort of, this is a middle ground kind of slide series so far. I have about 200 more slides if we need to throw some out and add some new ones, or put a little more emphasis on A versus B. And you're stuck with some of my biases, because this is what I do as a clinician, or we do as an agency. So it's how we approach these topics, but you may need some other things. That all make sense to everybody? Kind of thing. Shake heads is good for me. All right. So this is my first draft kind of thing. I was saying that to Melissa, I was lucky one of the court cases in Fresno got shoved till next week. So I had enough time to at least give you a draft of this kind of thing. It says host disabled sharing here, Melissa.
Here, let me make you a co-host then, David.
Good, thank you. Tell me when you're ready.
We are ready.
Let's see if we can get that sucker to come up this time. There it is. Even can see it. So this is sort of the topic that Melissa gave me. So I tried to squeeze it all in one slide. So this is kind of, and if we want to modify this title a little bit, but that's the one I'm sort of working off of at the moment in our conversations I had with Melissa. It's hard to do exercises online, but I thought I'd start with just a minimum one. And it's also a huge bias of mine. We finished a large 4-year research project where we taught mindfulness to 6,000 teachers in 9 school districts. Got a huge grant to do that. And then following that, we did trauma screening of 5,000 kids. And then we did therapy for 1,500 kids who were really high on trauma screening instruments. So I'm really into mindfulness stuff. I don't think it's the be all and end all. I think it's a really nice ancillary kind of product. So I think it's really important for people to understand that for us as therapists, we struggled going in, and I watch having to monitor as a supervisor my clinicians that have too many sexual child abuse cases, because all of a sudden they won't let their children leave the house anymore, or even go to scout camp or something, because they get so enmeshed and so overwhelmed by all this really painful stuff they have to deal with all the time as a clinician and therapist. But living in COVID, dealing with child abuse, dealing with all the stressors we've got in life now, our brain is all loaded up with cortisol, really some good neurological research that's been done by a couple of different folks. So certainly it's really clear from the research being done by 3 or 4 of the really good research people. Vanderkolk is doing this, Bruce Perry's doing this, a number of other people are doing this, that if we use mindfulness or meditation or yoga or similar kinds of things, we lower cortisol. It's measured now. We can see cortisol levels in the brain going down, which means it improves memory, because when cortisol is high and you study or learn new things or practice stuff, it never encodes. So you can't use it when you really want to apply it. So that means it improves cognitive force. So what I'm going to do to lead off, I'm going to run through a mindfulness breathing exercise for everybody. Something we ask teachers to do with kids at the beginning of the day. We do at the beginning of each therapy session, and most of my staff do it so they can refocus before you walk into a session that may sort of tax your skill set in some form or another. So I'll start it out that way. I thought I'd run through some of the stats that I think this is sort of so everybody's on the same page. This is exactly what I say in court, except I just lost an appeal in Fresno. We can't use percents anymore. So I have to say most of the time, some of the time, but these percents are from really good research from a number of really great people, which I'll cite a little bit in the training, people I've actually worked with as colleagues. I think an overview for child abuse for folks to say, if we don't do a good assessment, I ask my folks all the time, so what did your trauma symptom checklist say, and what do you draw from that versus your interview with this family? Do they sync up? Do we have blind spots because of our own approach? So I think 2 or 3 assessment instruments or approaches give us probably a heck of a lot broader and more accurate approach. Most of us are doing individual therapy, partly because it's the only thing to do, partly because, like all the rest of us, we've done 75% of our therapy online for a year. And that's all we got going. And even though it's like pulling teeth and pushing and shoving, every time I can do family therapy, I feel like I'm 10 steps up on doing stuff. And if we've got any offenders coming back to the family, in the family, those kinds of things, I think it's the only way to go and has to be done. We do some home visitation, not as much as I would like. As we get back up and running again, I think it's something we've got to think about. I don't care what a family tells me about their home. When I go visit, I get insights that are mind-boggling at times and very valuable kind of stuff. And we can't forget that we've got kids who need medication, and families and other kinds of folks. I think for us treating child abuse, I think we should think about, what am I treating? I'm a very much of a behaviorist, so I'm stuck there. I teach trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, so that's my shtick. I do other stuff, but so in behavioral therapy, these are the kind of things that we have to assess and see what we've got going. I would really like to see if these kinds of issues can be addressed in therapy and help the family. And since we're doing a family approach with potentially offenders, non-offender caretakers, as well as survivors and siblings, et cetera. Our substance abuse in our area is up dramatically. We've had a large number of ODs in high school kids. Of course, there's fentanyl out there and a lot of the opioid-looking drugs, so that's lethality immediately. Kids talk about hooking up with everybody, and I got 3 kids that just got arrested for sexting online, sending nude pictures around. They don't know the fact that if you take a sex picture of yourself and you're 15, a nude, and then you send it, you've just committed a felony, even though it's a picture of yourself. Well, it was a shock for somebody recently in a case. We know that pregnancy's up. I don't know how you guys are doing. We've had 10 suicides in the last 9 months. 50% of them had sexual child abuse in their history. I do what's called a psychological autopsy when my team goes out. We've done 40 suicides in the last 3.5 years of K-12 kids in the 9 districts I serve out of our agency. So I just, it's a hot topic for me, at least. We have to do diagnoses in most of the stuff we do. We should do diagnoses in most of the stuff we do. For most of you, I just said this to the jury. I tried to explain post-traumatic stress disorder to a jury with 0 hours of psych training, but at times it's really important. I think John Barrera's work on complex PTSD adds to this kind of stuff. So for all of you, you know what you're seeing this, but if we don't be careful, we miss some of these diagnoses because dual diagnoses or multiple diagnoses, I think, are common in child sexual abuse. Here's some screening instruments we use or are using. Parent Stress Index, we have so many kids that are involved with drugs and alcohol that are also survivors. We run an addiction severity index. There's actually one you can put on a computer and they can take while they're waiting. If you've got a room where you can just send them in and have them take it. I think Barrera's symptom checklists are wonderful and we use them all the time. Sometimes look at behavioral. I'm involved in a research project and I'm training for the California ACE Academy at the moment. And we're going to give PEARLS to about 4,000 elementary kids, the PEARLS instrument, to look at their history of adverse childhood experience issues. We're going to use it to do pre-screening for suicide to see if we can pick up kids who are potentially suicidal before they have said anything or are symptomatic. We're missing kids that are hanging themselves at 10 and 12 years of age. We're trying to find another way out of it. That big project I talked about, we used the TESI C to screen all those kids because it's a 10-question, 10-minute screening tool, which was handy, but gave us some insight, something for people to consider some things out of this list. There are more. I think that the trauma symptom checklist is so good. And these are the basic elements of it. We use the trauma symptoms checklist for young children. If kids are 8 or under, it's a little bit of a developmental question. We are a certified PCIT center. Some of you I know are. Worked with Dr. Anthony Arcasa forever. I think it's great. I like what he's done up at Davis with PC Care, because lots of people have a $50,000 one-way mirrored room all loaded up with cameras and audio. Thank goodness for a grant from the state of California. I couldn't build another room today. And I'm not sure whether I would or wouldn't, depending on how much I got out of it. But I like PC Care because I don't need all the gear and all that fancy stuff. And it takes the highlights of PCIT and puts it to work. And Davis is doing training in both. I think that TFCBT is sort of great. I used TFCBT in public schools for 5,000 kids. I spent some time talking to Cohen and Mannarino. I took training directly from them when I got trained initially, and asked if I could drop from it the issue about doing the trauma sort of history survey that's in it, because we felt like it would trigger too many kids in the public schools and they'd have to go back to class. They agreed with me. And so we have a modified TFCBT we do inside of the public schools. If we need to do the trauma narrative, we do that after school or in the office. I think Eliana Gill's work on trauma-focused play therapy, if anybody's into that, Eliana, I think is one of the best. She's got tons of stuff published on it. And I've talked about mindfulness, yoga, et cetera. We've had to drop yoga from our public schools title because we had conservative religious groups telling us we were indoctrinating children into Eastern religion. So I don't call it mindfulness and yoga anymore, except when we talk in private to each other as clinicians. This is why I think TFCBT is so good. This is really good research done by SAMHSA. If you need to sort of convince people this is really good stuff, it takes a little while to train our staff, but I think it's really, really something they can use effectively. Just got to remember who it's for and who it's not, that kind of stuff. And if we're doing a diagnosis and get PTSD, we've got all the criteria information we need. Okay, let's talk about, this is the tricky part for me, so I'll need some help at the end. We do work with, we treat offenders, adult and juvenile. We do family reunification of offenders back into the system. Sometimes I scream and yell at probation officers because they want to reunify and I don't. So the more they will listen, and we work as a sort of a good group. I think it works really well between CPS, probation, courts, and others to when we look at reunification when it's appropriate and steps. So, but I think it's important to remember that offenders got a problem. Why they're offenders. And it's these kinds of issues that got them into that situation, put children at risk. And I don't care, you know, to be honest, I'm not as interested in whether we had some sort of sexual or, you know, genital contact or not. There's an awful lot of stuff that's sexual in nature and destructive and traumatizing for kids in really concerning ways. And I think it's important to understand exactly how offenders work. If we're going to assess them, work with them in a family, work for safety protocols, we just gotta say what is, and make that very clear. And I think it's really hard for the non-offending parent in particular, because they're stuck in the middle between food on the table and shelter and who they're going to protect and side with. And as we all know in the business, we never know how it's going to play out until we get into working with them. This is a protocol that's been used around the country. It's a protocol we like. It was developed by a number of groups over the last 10 years, but making offenders write out in-depth responsibility letters and until they're acceptable and done, and then meeting with victims and other folks in their red, and we develop safety plans. I think it takes some special skill set to treat offenders, but if we do what we call a responsibility meeting, the offender and his or her therapist are in the meeting, the therapist for the child is in the meeting, and possibly a facilitator, as we start talking about how we're going to do this remerging this family. Now, if you got a family that's already in place, the question is, can you make them safer, stronger? Can you get buy-in from them to do it? And I think in that kind of facilitated meeting, it's a good point of discussion. I would do it first with the adults in terms of a couple counseling kind of thing. And sometimes we actually do supervised meetings. So first time the offender spends time with the victim, we have a neutral supervisor who sits in the meeting. It's tough for people just to know our options in life, ending up with, family therapy, because we actually would like to make a resilient family that's stronger coming out of this, less likely to have a reoffense in that family, those kinds of issues. Treating juveniles, we've had a huge problem. We've had a lot of older juveniles start molesting the same children that a adult caretaker molested because they somehow internalized it's okay for him, it's okay for me. And that's been a huge issue with us in our juvenile sex offenders. I think it's important for caretakers to have this basic set of knowledge. We can do it in couples, we can do it in family, we can do it in psychoeducation, which I think is very important. TFCPT has huge psychoeducation. I think this has good psychoeducation. People never even talked about these topics, thought about these issues, saw them in the context we want to see it in. I think we have to sort of have a vision, and the vision is strong families with these kinds of characteristics. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's already going to get there, but where are we working to? What are we measuring things by? What do we expect? What do we hope we can help you with? I love this quote from FDR. So I can't fix the society and I can't fix others, but I think as a therapist, I think I get some kids that are a little more resilient coming out of the process. Some of the key resources for the people, I think I've worked with Bruce Perry on a number of occasions, teaching with him. I think he's good. Upfront thing, I'm a trainer for APSAC and work with him. I've co-trained with Dr. Briere. He's really somebody, he's got tons of free stuff on his website. Perry does, APSAC does. You don't have to join, you don't have to buy it. Same thing with Bessel van der Kolk. I think if you're doing trauma therapy, you should take some of his online courses, period. My staff has probably got about 18 hours of Perry training. The National Child Trauma Stress Center will send you free stuff all the time. They do great trainings once we get back into training again. I know they're a for-profit operation, I think, but PESI has sort of collected some of the best trauma and child abuse therapists in the country. And I will say this offline to you guys, I buy the DVD and then I can train staff over and over again, as opposed to do the online live training, because then I can do training for all new employees. We can do refresher stuff. And so a one-time cost to send 40 some people through training for $250 seems like a pretty good deal. So we do that. Most of you know that CIR has the CATA grant, and everything they have is available, and they archive it like most everybody's doing. I think I have 3 workshops archived with them at the moment. We did over the last sort of 18 months. So those are the resources. So that's my quick and dirty overview of my first thought about basically after Melissa gave me this sort of task. I'll leave this up for a second if we need to look at something, and if we don't, then I'll drop it. Questions, thoughts, ideas? Thank you for any feedback.
David, it's clear that you have just a wealth of information. I'm really excited to have folks benefit from that. The way you can speak about it, I know this is a really quick overview, but I think it'll be a really engaging talk. I know, at least for my team, we don't work with offenders, and that's a pretty hard line at our agency. And it gets a little fuzzy with our chat program because sometimes the youth are also offenders, or sometimes the parent's still in the home, and our hands are a bit tied at our agency. So I think people are curious, what would it look like? So I think the only thing I'm concerned about is time, as always. And there might be a couple things in the beginning, if you're not going to go in depth, you might not even mention it. Just say, like, here's a list, you're going to get the slide deck. I'm going to focus on the ones we use. That's my only thought of what you could shift, but I loved it. I think this is going to be great.
Good. And I'll be honest with you all, disclosure here, I haven't timed it yet. I just finished it up about 8 o'clock last night, but I will time it. And I agree with you that how I do that, sounds like you've done this stuff too before. I will just say, okay, here's some stuff. And that I know that Melissa has it available for everybody. I think if people are new to it, they should review that stuff in depth. If some of us, it's like, oh yeah, I know that kind of stuff. That's good feedback. And that's how I can control my timing. Thank you much. An hour and 15 is what I'm working with, Melissa, for my portion. Is that about right?
Yes, and some of the questions that we had were about how interactive the content would be. I know that you mentioned that you were planning on doing a meditative exercise during the beginning, but I agree with Allison, there's such a wealth of knowledge. So we're just thinking about how we can also engage our participants, just so, if all of this is really valuable information, we can extend that time, maybe think through what that might look like or how this could be valuable to our members that are on the call.
Melissa, if you can do this, the last two, I just did some large trainings, and my facilitator had people type in questions. We did stop halfway through and took about a 5 or 10 minute break, and my facilitator, like you, reviewed the questions and saw a couple were in common and said, David, I have a couple questions if you don't mind doing that. And I could do it halfway through, and then at the end, if I could answer a couple. And if there's some common things, you could send them off to me and I could give you some generalized response. If there's people looking for more resources and stuff like that, I'm happy to do that as a part of my working with you guys, is follow that up with any Q&A that we've got at the end, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem monitoring the chat. And also, just for everyone on this call, I know that I said that this would be a 30-minute meeting, and I know that this is going just a little bit over. So I hope that you're able to stick around with us. But because this feedback is really the most important part, now that we have David on the call, I guess I'm just asking if you would all prefer to schedule another meeting to cover some of the remaining agenda items, or if it would be easier to follow up via email.
I'm with Allison. I can stay for another few minutes.
All right. Well, then, if there's any more comments for David, now would be the time to do so. But I will say it looks great, David, and I appreciate your efforts in making sure that the slide deck was prepared for us today.
Good, and I'll review it for editing, and then I'll send a copy off to you fairly soon. So you have it on your end for that kind of stuff. And I've made an agreement. I kept out some copyrighted stuff I've got. I can't let go. This stuff is not, I wrote all this stuff or took it from others. So if you want to share it later on, the only thing I ask is that the live slideshow not be put out. So I all of a sudden see all my slides someplace else, which has happened to me a couple of times, but I don't mind people having locked copies or having the note versions of this stuff for you guys. For our goal for all of us is to get as many people trained. If you could send me 10 more child abuse therapists, I'd really appreciate it. I know you all feel the same way when you're working in programs. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, and thank you, David, for agreeing to be our symposium speaker and really putting so much time and effort into the slide deck. I think we can all agree that it's much appreciated. And just so that you all know, David has also graciously agreed to allow CBCA to use the slide deck to develop self-paced modules. So that's something that will be available to you all afterwards. So if there's anyone that wasn't available for the training, if that's an easier way of learning and receiving the material, that'll also be an option to you all and anyone on your staff. So at this time, the next agenda item that I wanted to move into was how to use the remainder of our time together. The way that the symposium will run is we're going to have about 15 minutes of opening remarks, both from the Child Abuse Prevention Center, as well as our contact over at Cal OES. We'll have David speaking for about 75 to 80 minutes. And then we have about 30 minutes allocated at the end for some sort of collaborative activity, which I wanted you all to be a part of. So I provided a few options in the agenda about how we might want to think about this time. And I'm curious to know if any of you had any initial thoughts after reading that list or after hearing the material that David just presented to us. So does anyone have any initial thoughts about how to structure that time?
I have a little follow-up thought, maybe to expand the question a little in how can we use the time for CVCA members to connect with each other and really get the ball rolling on our peer-to-peer learning for future engagements. I don't know if that helps people envision things we could be doing with that time.
One of the thoughts I had in reading the list was not bringing in more information, especially after seeing the slide deck. One of the options was like bring in your agency's policies or something. I think the topic David's bringing is meaty enough that breakout rooms are great, and it should really center on the material that was provided. Maybe even, kind of grad school-esque. What are your reactions? What are some immediate thoughts you're having about integrating offenders into your work if you don't do that? What are some misconceptions that were busted by David's presentation? Some of that I think would be helpful. I also supervise clinicians, and those talks are usually where I find the most benefit. Bringing in more stuff, I think, would be a waste of what David's bringing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Allison. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think using the breakout groups to kind of reflect on what we've learned and also think about takeaways. I find that always helpful at the end.
I definitely like that idea.
If I can help by hanging around in a break room or anything else, I don't need to go away till you're done with the entire thing. So whatever works best for you, Melissa.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I appreciate that feedback too, just about what would be most valuable. And I took some notes about some of the questions that you brought up, Allison. And if there's any more that you all want me to present for breakout groups, that would be really helpful. I know that we only have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to briefly touch upon this. And something that I'm really hoping that we could do is at the end of this upcoming symposia is to announce the next one. And I wanted to give us a little bit more time so that we're able to collaborate. I know this one was really rushed just in order to really present something during our summer quarter. So I wanted to give us more time. So that one's going to be planned for October. And something that I wanted to ask you all is, now that we've seen what David's presenting, if there's any thoughts about what our next topic should be, or anyone that you'd like to see presenting.
Can we poll the attendees and see what they want?
Yes, absolutely. That was going to be a part of the session regardless. So I just wanted you all as advisory committee members to have a first say in what this might look like moving forward. But I just wanted to put it on your radar that the next symposia will be in October. It'll still follow this virtual format. So I just wanted to gauge if there were any initial thoughts right off the bat or anything that you all were particularly interested in. Before many of you joined, David and I were having a conversation just about how October is DV Awareness Month. So if that may be of interest, we could definitely move in that direction. However, again, I wanted to provide you all with the first say since we really want to prioritize your voices as advisory committee members.
Thank you, Melissa. One idea I have, it's not very well formulated. Can you hear me okay? Is just trying to think about bringing a race or diversity lens and thinking about how does racial bias affect this work and the child abuse system. So I don't have someone in mind, but just I think it would be, I would find it a really helpful, useful lens to think about.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Celine. Are there any other immediate thoughts? I know that this was a little bit tight, given that I know that some of you said that you can only stay for 10 minutes longer, but if we could follow up via email, that would be really helpful. Again, I'll plan to poll everyone after the symposia about topics that they'd like to see. I just wanted to get a gauge on if there's anything that you all were really looking forward to seeing in the next one, but if not, I just want to say thank you all for your presence here today. It's been wonderful getting to share this space with you. And thank you again, David, for sharing your slide deck and putting in all that energy into preparing it for us.
Thank you all for good feedback. Hope to see you in the middle of July.
Thank you all. I will see you all in July as well.
Okay, take care. Thank you so much.
Take
Thank
care.
you.